For the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's topic is a nutrition request, and the request was for talking about nutrition on training days versus non-training days. So in another recent podcast, I mentioned that one of the services we provide is trainer consultations. So we'll have trainers call us and ask for advice on how to handle either clients or business and stuff like that. So I've been personal training for 17 years, and that's been my kind of main source of income throughout school and afterwards. And I've owned a Brutal Iron Gym now for 8 years, which has been my main source of income. So it's kind of what I've been doing for a living, and I've made a living at it, thankfully, and I'm very grateful and very blessed and very appreciative of those who come here and trust in me to beat the crap out of them. But it's what I've been doing for a living. So sometimes we have people call and they want to have that same kind of lifestyle and that same goal. So they'll ask questions and we kind of do some consultations and stuff. So this is another topic, as I mentioned in that other podcast, this is another topic that comes up often enough that I decided to make a podcast about it. So this is a way that I can kind of send this to future trainers if they have the request for this type of information. So in general, we've talked about in the past with nutrition, there are kind of major components of what makes nutrition successful. So whether you're eating, a certain way on training days versus non-training days, that's a micro picture, so a small picture of a bigger process. So the bigger process components are making sure your calories are accounted for, you have the right amount of protein intake, your meal timing, when you're eating your calories is appropriate to your activity levels, and then everything else after that. So like macronutrient quality, like whether you're eating, white rice versus brown rice, or white bread versus wheat bread, organic or not organic, all that stuff kind of matters later. So the big three are, am I eating enough calories? Either, make sure I'm eating enough to grow, make sure I'm eating enough to where even if I want to lose fat, I have to make sure I eat enough that my metabolism is still good, and I'm not starving myself and freaking out and getting into like binge and starvation cycles. So there is a too few of calories, even for fat loss. So then we said the second one was protein intake, making sure you have enough protein for your body and your goals. And then meal timing, make sure you're eating what calories you need when you need them. So even if you have your calories correct, you're eating the right amount of calories per day, but you're eating at the wrong times, you're just going to feel like shit, you're not going to have very good energy, you're going to have a lot of cravings, and you won't look as good. So the number on a scale might be the same, but you won't look as good in terms of composition, in terms of being able to hold on to muscle mass versus fat tissue. So too often people get into the if it fits your macros and the intermittent fasting and all these other diets where timing is absolutely screwy, and they'll say, oh, I still saw the results I wanted in terms of weight loss, so a number on a scale. But they maybe had to go through kind of hungry periods that weren't necessary, cravings that weren't necessary. They might have had to over-rely on caffeine because they weren't eating their foods at the right times. That wasn't necessary. And then also they might weigh, their goal weight, let's say 150, but with correct meal timing, it could have been a better-looking 150. More muscle, less fat. So just because a number on a scale says the number you want doesn't mean you got the right results. There is a quality of results, not only a quantity of results. Okay? So just keep that stuff in mind. So podcast number 41 discusses all of those major components. Okay, so go check out podcast number 41, titled Diet Right, What Matters Most. Now that we got through all that crap, I will give the answer for what to do on training days versus non-training days. So I wanted to just kind of cut through kind of three common goals that people have, which is fat loss, strength gains, and or muscle mass. So when we think of strength gain, that can be actual performance as well. So like an athletic performance type goal. So if our goal is fat loss, what do we do on training days versus non-training days? Okay. So generally, if your goal is fat loss, you're going to be trying to control your caloric intake to make sure there's a controlled amount of restriction. So a caloric restriction, caloric reduction, to where your body is encouraged to pick off stored body fat as extra energy, so that way you can kind of burn that stuff off, get rid of that body fat that you don't want. So it's important on both days, though, that we have an adequate amount of protein. So we said protein was one of the big three. Our protein podcast is number 33. So you can go listen to podcast number 33 that discusses what is the right amount of protein for you. In general, the range is 0.6 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. There's a whole bunch of asterisks. There's a whole bunch of kind of variances within that range. So that's the range. And then you'd have to listen to podcast number 33 to find out where you fit in that range. But it's generally 0.6 to 1 gram, okay, per pound of body weight. Now, if you're going for fat loss and you have like 30% body fat, so let's say you weigh 250 pounds, but really it's only a 200-pound person covered with 50 pounds of fat, do you need 1 gram per pound of body weight for the 250? Or do you need 1 gram of body weight, 1 gram per pound of body weight for the 200? In general, we would relate it to a lean mass. It's not going to be 100% perfect for everybody to know what their lean mass would be. So what would you really weigh if you were, say, 10% body fat? That stuff gets kind of confusing, so go listen to podcast 33 and just go for the general middle of that range. So maybe 0.8. If you lift weights more often, like 5 days a week, and you actually do lift like weightlifting that causes muscular stress and damage, you might need to be towards the higher end of the range. If you're only exercising 2 or 3 times a week and it's more like, classes and, jumping around and stuff, but you're not really using heavy weight, then you need the bottom of that range. Okay. So it's important that we have protein intake on both days. We would kind of believe it to be common sense to have protein intake on your training day because that's when you're going to beat up the muscle. However, depending on the style of training you do, your muscles can take hours and days to repair. So you might do a very aggressive resistance training exercise like workout, and it might take your muscles 24 to 48 hours to repair. So if you decreased your protein intake on your non-training day, you're actually impeding or impairing the process of building new muscle tissue and repairing your existing muscle. So you're actually hurting your muscle processes. Now, why is it important that we keep our muscles healthy, we keep them growing, we keep them strong? Is because our muscle is metabolically active. It requires calories to stay alive, and that means that it burns calories. So out of the calories that you eat, your muscle tissue burns some of that off for you, and therefore it doesn't contribute to body fat. So the more muscle you have, the more you can eat and not get fat. So it's pretty freaking awesome. And then also muscle gives us the curves to our body that we want, male and female. So males want curves too. We just want them in like our chest and our arms, and I guess girls want curves in their chest as well. But that doesn't come from weightlifting, unfortunately. So, but your muscles are what gives you the curve, your hourglass shape. It gives you that look that's under your skin. So if you want to have muscle, if you want to have like, a bubble booty, so you have to have muscle to have a booty, okay? If you just get rid of the fat over top your bones, you're just going to have a flat ass. So if you want a bubbly ass, you have to build that. So you have to lift weights, you have to keep muscle mass. So how do we keep muscle mass is by eating an adequate amount of protein on both training days and non-training days. So don't reduce protein on non-training days. Now, are there ever caveats in certain times where we might do that? Absolutely, sure. When I'm working with aesthetic athletes for pro cards, sometimes we have to get into the nitty-gritty details of that. But if you don't plan on stepping on stage, if you don't plan on being under 10% body fat, don't worry about that stuff, okay? Just eat enough protein, the right amount, on training days and non-training days. Cool. Now, what is different? So we just talked about how protein is the same per day, but what is actually different per day? Well, on training days, we want to make sure, even if our goal is fat loss, that we eat enough calories that we can have a badass, kick-ass workout. So you don't want to undereat so severely on your training days that when you go to train, you feel like shit and you can't really do anything. Because you're not going to burn a lot of calories, you're not going to stimulate a lot of muscle damage, you're not going to stimulate stress to the body that our body then has to put calories into to repair over the next day or two. So the more hardcore, hard effort you can put into your training, the better fat loss effect you're going to have in the recovery period from that training. So if you undereat on your training day by, say, 300 calories, so that way you could feel like you're doing a better job for fat loss, but your workout sucks because you have no energy, well, then you're actually impairing a hell of a lot more than a 300 calorie burn over the next day or two. If you would have had a kick-ass workout that your body had to put a lot of effort into repairing, you might have been able to burn off like 600, 800, or 1,000 calories during that recovery process. So here you are trying to undereat by 300, having a shitty workout. Whereas if you eat around your maintenance calories, okay, like you don't need to eat a whole bunch. You don't need to go and eat a pizza to fuel your fat loss workout. That's pretty damn stupid. But don't severely undereat. So we have podcast number 153 that discusses how many calories do I need. So go listen to podcast number 153. Then use that answer in that podcast and eat around your maintenance level of calories. So you don't have to eat a bunch of extra, but you don't have to undereat. You just want to eat about what's normal, okay, a good, healthy normal for you on training days. And then use your kick-ass effort in your workout to burn a lot of calories on that day and to help elicit a high calorically burning recovery process. Then on non-training days, this is when you make up ground, okay? You have to have your adequate protein. Don't take protein calories away. But on non-training days, you can go ahead and cut calories here. And what you want to do is you want to get below maintenance level. You want to push for very slow digesting foods. So foods that will kind of give you slow, steady energy throughout the day. Not a ton of energy. You're not going to have a great non-training day in terms of energy. But that's when you want to go ahead and catch up on calorie loss. So that'll help you kind of push for more fat loss on those days. And it kind of makes sense. Like if on non-training days, if I'm not doing much, I don't need much in terms of calories. So that will be our general premise. Now, sometimes people ask, like, do I have carbs on training days or fats on training days or carbs on non-training days and fats on non-training days? So in general, that doesn't matter much. However, if you do want to get to the nitty-gritty details of the progress you can make, is generally on training days, you want to have fast and readily available fuel source, which is carbohydrates. So you would typically have more carbohydrates in your calorie allowance on training days, and then non-training days you want to typically focus more on fats and lowering your carbohydrates. The reason why is carbohydrates digest pretty quickly, so even if your caloric level is controlled on a non-training day, if you have a large meal at one time, like say I sit down and eat a 500 calorie meal, well, that's 500 calories right now in my system right now. So maybe I don't need 500 calories in this like 1 hour. I might need it over the next 3 hours, but I ate carbohydrates which digest faster than 3 hours. So therefore, all of those 500 calories got into my body too quickly compared to when I could use them. So some of them get converted to body fat, some of them get like kind of, we get rid of in waste, going to the bathroom, but it's not in the most efficient process. So we know if we're going to eat, if we're going to have lower level energy, more sustained throughout the day on non-training days, then we want to have lower level food, like lower digesting foods in terms of time, and have our food kind of spread out throughout the day in terms of digestion. So if we focus on fats on non-training days, they digest slower, and you'll have less spikes of income, like of caloric intake. So you'll have less likelihood of any carryover into body fat storage. Hopefully that made sense. I have no clue. So in general, carbs on training days, in general, fats on non-training days. And that's pretty true. It's pretty good. Okay? Pretty good concept to have. Now, strength gains. Say this is athletic performance. I want to be strong as I can. I want to be as explosive as I can. I want to kick ass in my workouts. Now, I don't want to be unnecessarily fat, but I don't really care about body fat. I just want to be whatever is the best for me to be as an athlete, as a strength athlete, whatever I want to be. Okay? So, again, both training days and non-training days have to have adequate protein. And we discussed why is because on non-training days, you're probably repairing from your training days. So you have to have the protein intake. Then on training days, eat whatever the hell is needed to have a great workout. Don't overeat where you get digestive stress and you're just eating shit that you don't need. Okay? But don't try to calorie restrict on training days. Eat what you need to fuel what you need to have a great workout that you need. Okay? So eat whatever you need. Okay? Now, still pay attention to meal timing. Eat most of your calories around your workout and, when at times away from your workout. So if you worked out at 10 a.m., don't try to eat, a whole freaking pizza at 10 p.m. You didn't need that. Okay? So still put most of your calories around your workout. That way you can have, again, maximal performance ability with minimal fat gain. Okay? So, then non-training days, you still want to focus on more healthier type, like slower digesting foods. You don't need really fast digesting foods on a non-training day. You just need slow, steady income of, I don't know why I keep saying income. You still need slow, steady intake of calories on non-training days to help with recovery, to help with repair, to help with just the general energy you want to have on those days. But again, you don't want to have really fast digesting spikes of calories because it leads to unnecessary body fat. Okay? So, Basically, for the strength athletes, it's just eat what you need on training days, but pay attention to meal timing so that way you don't get unnecessarily fat. And then on non-training days, just eat what you need to recover. You don't need anything fancy or anything extra on those days. Just eat maintenance level-ish. Okay? Now, lean mass gains. So my bodybuilders out there who want to have as much muscle as possible and no body fat. We want to look like Greek gods and have the beautiful bodies that we all want. You're, again, on both days, going to have to make sure you have adequate protein intake. And then enough calories to make sure you're feeling good, not having like starvation periods or like anything that like you don't want to be too low on non-training days to where it causes you to get into binge and starvation cycles. So if you notice after a non-training day, you just cannot control yourself the next day and you're eating everything under the sun, then you probably need to increase your calories on your non-training day so that way you don't overeat, overcompensate on the following day. Okay, so we've done a podcast in the past about caloric cycling for weight loss diets and for aesthetic diets. So let me look that up so you guys can listen to that podcast. Caloric cycling, so it's 173. Podcast number 173, the need for caloric cycling during diets. And that's also for aesthetic athletes. So it'll discuss a little bit more in detail about why we would want to have our calories high on training days and lower on non-training days. And some of the nuancing numbers of all that process. So, in general, if you're doing for aesthetics, is you want to eat what's needed to fuel your workout, but you're really, really, really going to control not overeating. Whereas our athletes and our strength people, they can eat whatever the hell they want on a training day. If they want to drink a whole gallon of sweet tea while they're training, who gives a shit if it's giving them good energy? Now, if you're an aesthetic athlete, you don't want to do that because it's just going to add unnecessary fat that you're trying to take off the very next day in your non-training day. So you want to be more controlled in eating enough to fuel your workouts, but having it be like precisely enough. And then on non-training days, eating just under your maintenance level of calories. So that way you get the repair you need for the protein, but you're not getting any body fat storage. Okay? So your windows of what's too much or not enough is much smaller when you're an aesthetic athlete versus just a general strength or performance athlete. So that's kind of the nitty-gritty of it. Is as an aesthetic athlete, you have to have more control. So bodybuilding, and this would include bikini at a high level, figure, physique, men's physique, women's physique. There's classic bodybuilding now. All the aesthetic sports. Your sport is more out of the gym than it is in the gym. So you might spend 2 to 3 hours in the gym, but the other 21 to 22 hours of your day still absolutely 100% matter. Every damn thing you put in your face will make or break your goals. So as an aesthetic athlete, your window of openness for these things to be correct is much, much, much smaller. If you want to be the best you could be and win like pro cards and stuff like that, and win shows. So when we say training days eating enough to what's needed to fuel your workout, that's going to be controlled amount over caloric maintenance. So you might find, okay, my maintenance level plus 300 gives me a good workout day. Then on non-training days, I'm going to do my maintenance level minus 300, and that might give me enough to recover, but I don't feel like I'm getting fat or bloated the next day or watery. So you might find that that balance is good for you. Now, you might try that, notice you don't have quite enough energy. So maybe on training days, you do maintenance plus 500. Then on non-training days, you do maintenance minus 500. And then you have to play around with caloric cycling on top of that. But that's the idea of an aesthetic athlete is you're going to have experimentation, take notes, figure all this shit out. So that way you're within like 100 to 200 of calories every day. Whereas a performance-based athlete or strength-based athlete, on a training day, hell, if they want to, have a box of Frosted Flakes, drink some Gatorade, drink some sweet tea while they're working out, maybe afterwards they're going to go get some hibachi and rice and chicken, they're not counting any of that shit. So they're just putting food in their face to make sure they feel good. So that's kind of the difference. Okay? So, again, we talked about carbs versus fats. Is generally on training days you want to have carbs because you're more active, so you need more readily available fuel source. So carbs digest quickly, they're available quickly. On non-training days, you don't want to have spikes in calories. You just want to have slow, steady stream of calories all day. So that's going to be slower digesting carbs and fats. So that's what you want to focus on those days. And that's pretty much why it helps us. What is the purpose of each day? If my purpose one day is I need tons of energy to be active right now, I need to eat foods that give me tons of energy and that are active and available right now. So same thing, but for its concept on non-training days is I want to have enough calories for repair, but I don't need them to be like spiked available, like readily available. They just need to be slow, steady throughout the day. Okay? Now, so that's basically a quick rundown. Hopefully this gave you enough information of what to do. So in general, on non-training days, you don't need as much food, but you have to make sure you eat your adequate amount of protein. Okay? On both days, you still want to pay attention to meal timing. On my training days, I still want to have most of my calories around my training time with lower amount of calories at other times. On non-training days, I really just want to kind of have my caloric intake match my activity level throughout the day. So if I'm not very busy in the morning, I'm kind of super busy in the middle of the afternoon, and then not so busy at night, my calories would follow that trend. Maybe you're just kind of a ho-hum level throughout the day, then your calories are going to be ho-hum level throughout the day. So on non-training days, you do whatever you need to do for your meal timing, your caloric intake, to match your activity of that day. And then it's actually the same on training days. You're just going to shove all your calories around your training time because you have a high activity at that time. So therefore you have high calories. So that concept of meal timing, which we've done a podcast just on that too. So let me look that up real quick. So meal timing is podcast number 249. So if you get that concept, that's pretty much one of the things you're controlling on non-training versus training days, is just making sure your meal timing matches the purpose of the day. Then with your caloric intake, it depends on your goal overall. So if my goal throughout the course of like a week is to lose weight, then I have to make sure on my training days and non-training days, when I average out my caloric intake for the week, that I have a little bit of a reduction below maintenance level. So that way I know I'm going to reduce body fat. So when I do aesthetic athletes with various degrees of activity, we have sometimes they'll do 2 a days on training, sometimes 1 a day, sometimes days off. We track their weekly caloric average to make sure we're getting a reduction going to shows. So that way we don't get lost in the variance per day and lose the big picture goal. So we'll have a weekly average, and I usually modify that and then spread that throughout. So if I want to have a 200 calorie, well, let's go with like say a 300 calorie reduction from this week from last week, then I'm going to spread those 300 calories plus or minus throughout the whole days of the week. So I might if I only want a 300 calorie reduction, I might not take anything away from my training days. If they're like say 3 of the training days, maybe 2 of the other days I might take 150 away. Maybe a couple of the other days I might take 450 away, and it all averages out to say a 300 calorie reduction by the end of the week. So stuff like that. So you do all this to make sure they have enough energy and adequate fuel sources for training days, enough to recover on non-training days, but make sure you don't lose that bigger picture of fat loss towards the show. Okay? So, hopefully that was helpful. That seemed like it might have got a little bit in the weeds there at the end. So, but it's kind of just eat what you need for your goal. So if your goal is fat loss, eat what you need to have good workouts on training days, but not more than that. And then on non-training days, control yourself, say no to some foods, and make sure you have a caloric reduction. If your goal is performance, eat what you need to feel active on your training days. And then on non-training days, just eat like normal human being. Don't be a butthead and eat a whole bunch of food and then wonder why you're getting fat. So just follow our normal rules of caloric timing, like caloric intake, meal timing, and your protein. Okay? So it always comes down to the big picture things. So people will often email me small details, and it's not bad to know the answers of small details, and by all means you should find them. But make sure you're doing the big stuff first, okay? Don't get lost in the small details and wonder why you're not getting results. It's never a small detail of why you aren't getting results. It's always going to be a bigger detail that you think you're doing correctly, but you're probably not, okay? Small details have small effects. Big details have big effects. So if you're doing a diet and you're saying, I'm not losing anything, that's a pretty damn big effect of like, oh crap, I'm not losing weight. So therefore, it's not whether something's organic or not, or whether it matches your blood type or not. It's going to be a big picture thing, okay? So go listen to podcast number 41, Diet Right, What Matters Most. It goes through the concepts that are most important. Get those things right first, okay? Then apply the stuff that we said today in terms of non-training versus training days and using caloric cycling to help your goal. Okay? Hopefully this was helpful. If you listen to this and you have any more specific questions, you're always welcome to reach out. I'll either give you the answer or I'll make another podcast for your answer, either way. So we'll make sure you get the information you need. Okay? So, thank you for listening, and hopefully this stuff does touch on what you guys want to know. And the more feedback we get from you, the better, so I can just keep making more detailed information. And I really, really, really want these podcasts to just help answer anything that you believe is holding you back. So our goal with this at Brutal Iron Gym and through the podcast is to just give people happiness in life, So if you can better control your physical health, and it has nothing, like a very small amount to do with the way you look. It's actually how you're going to feel. So how you look does affect self-confidence. Okay, that's one thing. But also eating correctly affects your energy levels throughout the day, which affects your moods throughout the day, which affects how you interact with people, which affects your relationship health. And then also if you're just kind of ho-hum and depressed all day and not feeling good, that's going to negatively impact your mental health. So our goal with this podcast is really to help answer anything that you guys think is holding you back from living the happiest, healthiest life you can. So please, please, please reach out to us with requests if there's anything holding you back in that. Okay? Cool. So if you like this information, you can find more from us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Brutal Iron Gym. Also, if you like the podcast, please share it with family and friends. So the more people we help, the happier the world will be. And if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions, we'd love to hear from you. So like I said, this podcast is for you, so we want to know what you want to learn about. And you can reach us at our email, brutalirongym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.